Washed into the middle of the valley, where they tried you with every game they dealt. You know him better than you know your family. Your patience born of stories that they tell. A tale of a Lazarus long running foreigner in each town.
My family, my father, my grandfather, and his father were all Episcopalians. And my grandfather was born a slave, and he was a member of the vestry. He was the one that built the church. He was the contractor for it. And I had no choice but to go to Sunday school every Sunday because my father insisted that I do. He became the superintendent for years and years and years. So I just had no choice. Neither did my two sisters. It has impacted my life. There's no question about it. My grandfather was a self-made man. And when I say that, I said because he didn't have any education, really. I'm talking about first, second, third grade, not at all. He could not write his name. He could not sign his name. But if you gave him a stick, he could get on the ground and draw up some of the most beautiful plans you have ever seen for building. But you got to remember now, I came from the South, the deep South in Florida, born and reared in Jacksonville, Florida. And segregation abounded everywhere. You had reminders every day wherever you went. You couldn't go downtown to the stores. If your mother took you downtown to buy a pair of shoes, they'd send you back home, and your mother had to take a piece of paper, a cardboard, put your foot in it, and draw a line around it, and that's what you took back down to the store to buy a pair of shoes. So what does that say about you? Who the heck am I? I'm nobody, I'm nothing. Everywhere you went, in fact, that was school busing then, but only for whites. The whites used to get on the bus and holler out the door when they see me walking in school for about 2 miles. He calling me the N-word, all that kind of stuff. So everywhere you went, everywhere. I played on the football team. I was one of the stars there in Stanton High School, Jacksonville, Florida. And I never had a uniform that was new. It was always a hand-me-down from the white school. Same thing with school books. I never had a brand new school book, always hand-me-down. So these things reminded me, and every black in the city, and the South too, of course, that who are you? You're nobody. You have no identity. You don't count. That really gave me an inferiority complex, no question about that. I thought that also at that time. Hey, boy, you're nothing. You don't amount to nothing. I suppose the hate symbol during that time was anything that was white. The white establishment, the white mayors, all of the white authorities. As a matter of fact, my book, the name of my book is Damn the Alligators, Full Speed Ahead. Guess who the alligators were? Those mayors and those governors and those people who wanted to perpetuate segregation.
I found the churches models of decency, if I can use that term, because African American, as you well know, the churches were the backbone of many of the things that they did. The ministers were strong. They had some very strong African American ministers here. They were crusaders, and also some were more liberal, if I can use that term, and the Episcopal Church and others that really took those crusades. You had some religions, as you well know, a little seeped in Southern traditions and so forth, but particularly the Episcopal Church was a model in working with that change and change of equality. and they're to be applauded for that.
Church didn't lead nothing. They lagged behind. The most segregated time in this country of ours is 11 o'clock on Sunday morning in our churches. Still is. Still is. I've heard blacks say, I don't feel comfortable around whites. And a lot of my white friends say they don't feel too comfortable around blacks either in their churches.
Well, my first real experience on a one-on-one level with blacks would be when Petersburg High School I was in the 8th grade and it was integrated, and we had a few of the more fluent blacks attend classes at Petersburg. So that was my first one-on-one. Other than that, my father ran a peanut business here and a chemical business, and his labor force was black. And we had black gardeners and black maids here. So I've always dealt with adults, but in '63 was my first experience one-on-one with kids of my age. And they were there, we were there. Nobody liked school, we all liked sports. And I thought we got along well. I think it's progressed, but I also think there are just as many black races as white races. However, that's not talked about that much. Well, same as the white races. They're not going to, until they come out and tell you, I hate white people, you don't know who likes you, who doesn't like you. Yeah, I think I wasn't hired to teach at the high school here. And I later found out that the principal didn't particularly like white teachers. And I think I made her mad when she asked me what I could bring to the high school, and I said, a wealth of experience from the business background and diversity. And she asked me what I meant by diversity. I said, well, I've been teaching in other school systems. I've been working in the workplace, and I can bring a different perspective. But she thought I meant that I was white and she was black. And I later found out that she wouldn't have hired me. And that was from one of my friends, a black friend who was an assistant principal there.
When I went to college, the only people there were the waitresses in the dining room. We never had a black person when I was in college. Yes, they do. My oldest grandson run with a black boy at the Episcopal High School. His grandfather almost had a heart attack. But they associated with him in school. I have mixed emotions. I don't want them to get in a situation that is not going to be good down the road, you know. I don't believe in a marriage. I'm a cradle Episcopalian. I'm the 7th generation to sit in the pew in St. Paul's Church. So you see what kind of background I have.
Trying to think of the fried chicken thing.
Yeah, like they say
the
on
watermelon fried chicken. Oh yeah, they call us coons. Mm-hmm.
Well, I come from a military background, and we've always, from my perspective of my history with being involved with the military, my dad was in the Navy, but we always kind of believed it doesn't matter, what skin color you have, but it matters how hard you work. That's always been kind of my belief, and I've always thought, you know, things like racism, sexism, or homophobia is really, it just doesn't make sense. I think it kind of, you know, comes, racism and discrimination kind of comes generation and generation, and eventually someone just has to stop it along the way.
I remember I knew how to spell white before I knew how to spell my name. My mother and father would say, you know, the WHITEs, so and so and so, and you know what the WHITs would do. And I'd say to myself, who and what are these WHITs? They keep spelling, you know. I have experienced sometimes overt forms of racism, sometimes subtle. For instance, one time when we lived in Norfolk, I wanted an ice cream cone. And my mother yielded to my pleas, and we went to Woolworth and asked for an ice cream cone. And they said, you know, we don't serve colored. At one time, I was talking with, I think he was a white physician, I've forgotten. And he was about to call me Margaret. That's why I resent, and I guess it's foolish of me, when I pick up the telephone and somebody who doesn't know me from Adam says, Margaret. I want to say, it's taken me all these years for you to call me Mrs. Call me Mrs. They would drop dead before they'd call a black woman Mrs. When I say there's a subtle form now, people will say, and my friends will say, well, you know how they do us. There's a sort of an undercurrent. You got equality under the law, but it isn't quite equal. If you get it, you got to almost push your way and get it. I'm entitled to this, therefore give it to me. A lot of people of my race wonder if push came to shove and their white friends had to make a decision. Will it be me or will it be this person? It's going to be this person. God and I are on very personal terms. And sometimes he and I don't see things at the same. And I laugh. I said, you know, I'm not worried about going to heaven because when they see me coming, they're going to close the gates. I said, because, you know, I'm coming up there with a list. Because there's some things that I don't understand. Why would you let bad things happen like this? I say, where was God? Where was he? When our people were enslaved, where was he? And the ironic thing is, the masters taught them religion. They didn't know about religion, but they allowed them to sit up in their balconies in church, and they found out about Christ that way.
Well, in fact, Bruton Parish Church was the first parish in Virginia, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, to desegregate. And this happened in 1955 under the direction of the rector at that time. And when the rector made this decision to invite some African American families in the Williamsburg area into the parish, He was not opposed by the vestry. It's very carefully worded that he was not opposed by the vestry. It doesn't say that there was clear support. However, there were people who left the parish, and sort of in a huff, if you will, and left the parish to go on to other things. And among those was a city official in the city of Williamsburg, a high official in the city of Williamsburg, who then went public with his objections to the entire subject of integration. And there's a quote that appears in the New York Herald in July of 1955 from this individual. He says, "I don't want integration. It would result in intermarriage and mongrelization. We think familiarity breeds contempt." When we identify issues such as this, we ought to be taking a firm and hard stand and moving out. But I also think that success is important, and that we want to make sure that we're doing things that we know we can accomplish. And so things may have to be done incrementally, but in a just and forward way. So, for instance, the rector that I'm speaking of was in the parish from 1938 to 1955. It was in 1955, a year after Brown versus Board of Education, that he took this step. And it's a bold step, because none of the other institutions around Bruton Parish Church at that time were actively integrating, including the College of William and Mary and the city of Williamsburg itself. So his was a bold action, but a timely one.
I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina in the 50s and the 60s. I lived in the suburbs, lived in a big colonial house. My father was a lawyer, my mother was a housewife. Everybody's mother was a housewife. The only black people I saw until I went to college were domestic workers, either in my own home or in the homes of my friends or people that I would see on the streets of Columbia. I never met a black person who was educated until I was 18.
Caroline and I lived parallel lives in the same city at the same time. She was of one culture, I was of a totally different one, and it was all based on race. I lived in the black section of town, which was very poor, and I was amongst the poor. Did not know that I was poor, did not think of myself as being poor, because this is all I knew. This was my norm. My mom worked several jobs, one of which for years and years was a domestic. My mom, most of the time that I can remember, worked two jobs. The domestic, which was a major job. We never really knew any of the whites, and we only met her employer, the domestic employer, once, and that was when they were going to have a big shindig, and they needed to have my mom to come over and do the house cleaning, but they needed someone to work with her. And so my sister and I were taken along for a couple of hours, and we saw the inside of the house, and we were able to clean with my mom, but that was about it. We saw the food being laid out on the table, but we were gone before any of the guests came, and I'm sure that she did not, the lady of the house, did not know, may have known, probably did know that we were there, but that is absolutely all. Did not know our names or anything at all like that. My mom used to complain sometimes that there was no respect for her. And that was the norm of working as a domestic. There was just no respect. One of the things that we in the Black community always did and were always told to do was that you address your elders by Mr., Mrs., et cetera, never by the first name. We were absolutely appalled that people would call my mom Willie Mae. What's with that? And she would say, that's okay, baby, that's just the way it is. And we're like, we can't do it, so, you know, why can they? But that was the way it was.
There was always a sense in my life when I was growing up that something was wrong, something was off somewhere. Whenever the old joke about not talking about religion and politics at dinner, you didn't talk about race. It made people uncomfortable. People got odd. Adults made eye contact across the heads of children. And you knew something was wrong and you didn't know what it was. And I've reflected on it later after I was an adult, and I've decided it was fear. They would have to say what they were afraid of, but the whole idea of even addressing segregation, Jim Crow segregation as it was at that time, made adults afraid, I think. So they didn't talk to us about it. Life was the way it was. We lived in a white world, except for the black maid and the black cook and the black yard man and everybody else's black maids and black cooks.
We lived what I think was a relatively happy life because we did not know anything else. We did not know what we did not have because we were all in the same place. The tragedy of it is that it was legislated that there be this gap, that we were to live like this here and never really know what was going on over here. I think it was a tragedy for both sides because it became the American way for the blacks and the American way for the whites, and they did not meet. Where I never really encountered any violence, the hostility was palpable. You were treated rudely, you were bumped on the sidewalks. Once when I was walking to the bus with some friends of mine, girls, certainly no problem in terms of, we certainly couldn't do anything. We were mooned by a group of the white students sticking their bare butts out of the windows and yelling things at us. And we were like, what? You know, why is this going on? And we just, of course, called them stupid and kept going. But it did hurt because it was happening and we had no control over it, and we weren't being told why. It was just, you're second-class citizens. I was raised not to trust whites. I was raised with the understanding that there would be a smile on the face and a knife behind the back. Don't trust them. I mean, it was drummed into you. Do not trust them. Because that was the experience of the people that raised me.
One of the first things we have to do is we have to talk to each other, and I mean really talk to each other. It's been hard for people to talk about this subject, as we've gone about these interviews. And I've been surprised to realize that it is still so painful for everybody, both black and white. We have to talk, we have to develop an authentic relationship that is built on something other than distrust and fear, and a history that is fraught with those things. We're starting by having these conversations. The amazing time for me on this committee was meeting Veronica and discovering that she and I might have been friends. Really, not just maybe, really. We could have gone to the same schools. We didn't live that far apart geographically. But because of legislated segregation, we missed out on a friendship that we both might have liked. She and I have a same sassy sense of humor. We might have had a good time together. So there's a loss there. And we need to repent of that loss and make sure that my grandchildren don't suffer that loss.
What I need for the Episcopal Church to do is to provide an atmosphere where people can come together and interact on an equal basis. Because when growing up, you were okay as long as you accepted the fact that you were not equal, okay? And that was on both sides. That was on both sides. And so the Episcopal Church can start trying to repair the breach by creating situations or fostering situations where you work as a team, as 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 individuals that are working for a common cause, and so race never enters into it. And you become acquainted with each other and understand each other as human beings. And I think when you do that, you don't really think about race anymore. You don't really think, you just think human beings and friends. And until you can get some understanding of why I react like this, and I understand why you react like this, I think we're still going to be very much breached. That gap is going to still be there.
The issue isn't so much addressing racism as a social issue as it is addressing racism and how does it affect the body of Christ in 2013? And how is our history part of that? I think to fully understand the nature of who we are as people and why we do what we do, one has to ask serious questions about what is the makeup of our DNA spiritually and socially. And in order to know that, you have to do some looking. You've got to take apart the structure of the gene of who we are. And that means going back in time and looking at the evolutionary process of who we are. Congregations in particular have personalities. And those personalities are based on years and years and years of their experience, I think, as church. And are informed by any number of things in their past history. To the degree that we're often not aware of it, or they're often not aware of how their history is affecting their present behavior. You know, my sense is that we've made tremendous progress around this issue. The changes, the social changes in my lifetime and our lifetime, it's been pretty phenomenal. But I think there is in all people a tendency towards some form of racism. It is part of the fallenness of humanity, as is greed and hubris and any others that we could talk about. Actually, racism's probably both of those things combined in some ways. So that's not part of us that we're going to get rid of just because we make social changes. It's part of our fallenness. And as Christians, one of the things we do is we take seriously our fallenness. And we try and come to terms with that, both by learning about it and by asking for God's forgiveness, so that we might be grace-filled, loving people despite who we are as fallen creatures. And that's what God wills us to do, wishes us to do, calls us to do. I think I see the liturgy as a possible, certainly an ongoing, but maybe more specifically, an end point of expression of that where we go after we've had conversation. As Episcopalians, we're liturgical people, obviously, and so that if we can have valid, meaningful conversation in which we're willing to look at our past, and then to sum that all up in a liturgical experience, then that is a way of taking what we've learned and who we are and offering it to one another and to God. So liturgical expression is always the way we bring it all together, so to speak, and offer it as a burnt offering, I guess, as a sacrifice to God. So I think that liturgical expression around the issue of racism and forgiveness in our diocese is an opportunity after we've had that conversation, or possibly part of the conversation. But it seems to me it reaches its fullest expression as the conclusion of a process, just like the Eucharist is the conclusion of our worship together on Sunday.
Oh, Lazarus, you're able. You know it in the end, you will prevail. A spot open for you at a holy table. The sickness is just temporary. Or sickness will not lead you to your death. Oh, your sickness